public access. Before we begin with the town manager's budget presentation, I would ask if we have any communications from the public. Any public communications from the committee? Okay, with that, I'll get right into our main topic for this evening. We have Carrie Speidel, town manager, and she'll be presenting her proposed annual budget for fiscal 2015. Carrie?
Okay, thank you and good evening. Thank you all for attending the meeting this evening. There are two handouts that are available. One is a copy of the proposed budget and one is a copy of the presentation this evening. They are both also available on the town's website. So to begin the presentation, I always like to let people know up front that this budget is a living document. It is, there are changes to it that occur. Hopefully not a whole lot of changes on the expenditure side, but on the revenue side at this point in time, because we're so dependent upon state aid and the legislative process to approve the state budget falls behind our process. So we can see changes in what we project for state aid. So it is important to keep that in mind as we go through the budget process over the next couple of months. So in terms of putting together this recommendation, as we do every year, we look at our service level needs and we look to fund service levels. We don't provide automatic increases to any department because we're just not able to do that within the economy. There are a couple of increased expenditures that I have provided for in this recommendation, and I've kind of identified them as minimal strategic investment for maximum impact, and I'll go through those in the departments that I'm proposing some increase. There is a small amount of additional funding for our road program. Last year was the first year that we actually put a decent amount in the operating budget for roads. We put $107,000 in our operating budget to match with Chapter 90. This year there is $128,000, and hopefully we will continue to grow that as we pay off some of our non-exempt debt service. This recommendation also funds any contractual salary increases that we are bound to by collective bargaining agreements. And it is a balanced budget proposal based upon the use of recurring revenues for operating costs. So we're not looking to pull from free cash with the exception of the deposit into the stabilization fund, which I'll talk about. And we're also not looking to draw on the stabilization fund to fund either the budget, the operating budget, or the capital budget. So in putting together the recommendation, I look at a number of different things. Specifically, the governor's budget, which is referred to as House 2. It used to be House 1. Somehow it became House 2. I'm not sure why. But that was issued mid-January, so that is available. I also look at our local receipts, and specifically with local receipts, the big thing that we look at is our motor vehicle excise, our first commitment of the year, which comes out in February. We do have that. We also have our health insurance renewal, which was very good news, and I'll talk about that shortly. We do have our retirement assessment, which is not so good. And we can talk about that too. And we also have the Monty Tech assessment, which is helpful. It's much easier when we have all of this information when we're putting the budget together, because we're looking at each dollar that we spend, and it's very difficult once we put a recommendation together to come back and deal with some big increase because something changed significantly. So first we'll look at revenues, and we have four sources of revenue. Property tax, state aid, local receipts, and available funds. Property tax composes 65% of the budget. State aid is 22%, local receipt is 8%, and available funds is 5%. So overall, in fiscal 2015, we're looking at about a 2.2% increase, which is good news. That's about $688,000. Most of that comes in the form of property tax, but that is offset by a slight decrease in local receipts, and we're actually using less in available funds in fiscal 15 as opposed to 14, but you might recall in the current fiscal year, we used a large amount of free cash to fund capital, and that's the big difference in the available receipts. I'm not planning on using a big chunk of free cash for capital this year, due in large part to the fact that we don't have a whole lot of free cash, and we probably will use that free cash to fund the snow and ice deficit that we're projecting. So I don't see that we will have an issue with the snow and ice deficit this year, and we can talk about that also if you are interested. But in terms of property tax, it's an easy calculation. We increase the base 2.5%, add in an estimate for new growth. And this year, in fiscal 15, I'm looking at $150,000, which is less than what we've seen in the last couple of years, but pretty typical for what we've seen in a period of time where there hasn't been a lot of development. The last 3 or 4 years even, we've had a boost to new growth as a result of the development of Emerald Place and Tri-Town Landing. It is possible that in fiscal 15 we will see a fourth building, the fourth out of 6 at Tri-Town Landing, be developed, but at this point in time, we don't know that for sure. I know the developer is interested in continuing and is working with the state on the financing of that, but I spoke with him back at the end of January, and he's not sure that when they're going to pull that together, so I'm not making any assumption for that. And then we add in, if we had an override, we would add that in. We add in debt exclusions. And the debt exclusion right now for fiscal 15 is slightly less than fiscal 14, but I want to point out that at this point in time, I have not included any assumption for the middle school, high school project. And I probably am going to say that 5 times tonight to make sure that everybody knows when they leave. It's not in here yet. And the reason it's not in here is we don't have the cash flow analysis from the owner's project manager. So until I have that, know when that project is going to need cash and how much cash, it doesn't make any sense to put anything in here. It doesn't impact the operating budget because it's exempt debt, so whatever we need to raise to pay that off is going to be outside of this operating budget. So obviously there's an impact to the taxpayer, but there's not an impact to the budget per se. State law, as you know, requires us to assume 100% collection rate, even though we collect typically a little bit less than that, but we do very well. Almost always over 98% of collections at the end of the fiscal year, and then within the next 60 to 90 days in the following fiscal year, we get even higher than that. But we do have to budget for 100%, but we would never collect 100% within the fiscal year, so that creates an issue for us already. In terms of state aid, I am using the governor's proposal for state aid for the first time in many years. We used to always use the governor's proposal the first time out with the budget because it was always the low amount. The legislature always, or almost always, did better than that. In the last 5 or so years, maybe not quite that long, the governor's proposal has been different and sometimes significantly different than what actually gets approved by the legislature. So last year, for instance, we weren't anywhere near what the governor's proposal was. But this year I am using it. It does provide a 5% increase in Chapter 70, which is great news for us. The governor's budget proposal does not fully implement the equity provision of the funding formula, which would be of great benefit to the town of Lunenburg, but that is not included. There's a portion of that included, but that's not included. The governor has not included any increase in general unrestricted general government aid or lottery aid, even though the lottery is projected to increase significantly in 2015. And I pulled a quote from something that the Mass Municipal Association put together, and I think it is a real good description of what we're seeing. It says, an improving economy and revenue outlook, including expected gains in lottery revenue, warrants a much better municipal and school aid program for 2015 than the one proposed by the governor in House 2. And I don't think it can be said any better than that. At the financial forecast presentation, I did mention that I had the opportunity to go into Boston and sit in on a joint revenue committee hearing, and you could tell at that time that the stage was being set for increased revenues to stay at the state level, and particularly to fund cuts that had been made over the last several years in mental health services, human services, departments and agencies that have been cut significantly at the state level year after year. So, that's an important service that the state provides, and money certainly needs to go back in there. But when they're projecting significant increases in lottery, and that lottery aid should be benefiting cities and towns, and we are so far below in lottery aid where we were in fiscal 2008 and 2009, it's very disappointing to see really no increase in aid. So this is a graph that shows Chapter 70 in blue, the unrestricted general government aid in red or maroon, and then in green, all other aid. And you can see in 2015, we certainly are higher than we have been in the last several years. But in terms of, and you might be able to see it, no, you're not going to. In terms of the unrestricted general government aid, we will be receiving $915,000 in fiscal 2015 under the governor's budget. We've been receiving about that for the last 3 years, and we were receiving $400,000 more than that in fiscal 2009. The level of the general government unrestricted aid in 2015 is about what it was in 2007. So if you were to inflate that just by a modest basis, that $400,000 really would be closer to $600,000, and you can see why we have some of the budget issues here in Lunenburg that we do, because that is an important revenue component for us. And to the extent that anybody is interested in contacting either Representative Benson, Representative DiNatale, Senator Flanagan, to let them know that the town of Lunenburg would be interested in seeing restoration of that aid, please feel free to do so, because they do like hearing from their constituents. Interestingly enough, at the Mass Municipal Association meeting in January, Speaker DeLeo, in addressing the group, he said that the legislature would do better for cities and towns than the governor did. So hopefully we will see something. The Mass Municipal Association is calling for a $45 million increase in lottery aid to be distributed to cities and towns. That would roughly mean about $45,000 for the town of Lunenburg. So while that would be appreciated, it's not anything near what we have lost over the last several years. The next category of aid, which represents about 8% of our budget, is local receipts. And I am projecting a decrease of about $21,000 here. And the biggest reason for the decrease is in the past, we've received a Medicare Part D reimbursement from the federal government for providing prescription drug benefits to our retirees. We received about $50,000 per year since we were eligible for that. We will not be receiving that either in in fiscal 2015. And the reason we're not receiving it is because we made changes to our both active and retiree plans. So retirees are now receiving their prescription drug benefit through Medicare Part D, and we're saving about 4 times what we were receiving. So it was to our benefit to make those changes, but that's the reason you see a decrease in local receipts. I'm basically projecting a flat, pretty much flat, and our local receipts are motor vehicle excise, which we did receive the first commitment. It was up about 5.5%. That's very healthy. Last year it was up about 7.5%. We have always done well in motor vehicle receipts year after year after year here. Some cities and towns saw decreases when the economy went down. We never saw that, thankfully. Even though this commitment is up 5.5%, I'm only projecting an increase of 2% for fiscal 2015. Each 1% would bring in $14,000. I'm going to try something a little different this year. I put together a balanced budget, and I'm going to give the Finance Committee and the Selectmen the opportunity to make some changes here so we can all participate. This might be something that you might say, you know what, you need to put that up a couple more percent. And I mean, that's, 2%, $28,000, that's something. So that's something that we can talk about as we go through the process. Another item I wanted to mention is fines and forfeits, and we talked about this when we went through the second quarter financial reports for the current fiscal year. I have increased fines and forfeits by 25%. Fines and forfeits are essentially our motor vehicle fines. And we have seen a significant increase in those receipts. I've asked the police chief for some additional data on that, and he is working on that. Another thing that he is working on is he will be presenting to the selectmen an updated fee schedule or fine schedule for motor vehicle infractions. Fines for motor vehicle can be written either under state law or local ordinance, local bylaw. If they're written under local bylaw, 100% of the fine comes to the town of Lunenburg. If they're written under state law, we get 25%. Right now, most of our fines are written under state law. We can just as easily enact the bylaw here and write them that way and collect those fees and fines. This is not something I was necessarily aware of, so this is something that we are going to be doing in fiscal 15, and as we go through the process and I have more data, I can give you information on what we think that would bring in. So that is some good news for us. And then in terms of available funds, I think the two things that I'd like to mention here is I am proposing a free cash appropriation to the stabilization fund of about $75,000 to keep us at the 5%, which is important to maintain our bond rating. We also have $67,000 that is available from unexpended prior year capital articles that we will be putting towards our 2015 capital budget. So again, overall, for revenue, looking at a 2.2% increase, which is about $688,000. If you'd like, I could stop here and answer questions on revenue or continue to expenditures.
I have a question or two on revenue. Kerry, you mentioned that the legislature is likely to improve on the governor's budget, but as we saw in fiscal 14, they approved a higher level of Chapter 90 funding, which the governor has not released or not fully released. I guess there's a couple of questions in there. Do we think there's a chance that we might yet get the fiscal 14 remaining 1/3 of the Chapter 90 funds? And what risk is there going forward that the legislature increases the budget, but the governor doesn't release the funds?
In terms of what happened with Chapter 90, at the Mass Municipal Association meeting, the Secretary of Administration and Finance was asked that question. The governor came in and spent a couple of minutes and shot across across the bow, put a shot across the bow. Really upset the whole room. The governor is upset with cities and towns over their failure to buy into some of his pension reform, and I think that has something to do with why we're not seeing an increase in lottery, but there probably isn't that directive an impact, right? But in terms of what happened with Chapter 90, the answer was that the governor has no intention of releasing that additional Chapter 90. That in his mind, that Chapter 90, that whole budget package was predicated on increased taxes, a tax package. And because the tax package didn't go in, he's not interested in the full spending package. So there wasn't any doubt in my mind that we were not going to see that additional Chapter 90. In terms of, would that... The Chapter 90 is a little different because it's in a bond bill that the governor has full control over, the spending down of that. So it's a little different than the state budget. I mean, the governor can veto the state budget, but then the legislature can override that. So there's more checks and balances with the state budget than there is with that Chapter 90 bond bill, which the governor has full control over. So I think they're a little different.
Okay, that said, it sounds like from the comments that Speaker DeLeo made that they will likely increase the governor's budget.
I think they will increase the governor's budget. I think both in terms of Chapter 70 education aid and the general government unrestricted. The legislature is also in the process of working on a new Chapter 90 bill, which I'm just not as familiar with those details. So I know they haven't given up on that. They're going to go about it, I think, in a different way.
And if I'm not mistaken, we're unlikely to have any final action on that in time for the May town meeting. Is that the case? On
the state budget?
Yeah.
So the process for the state budget is the governor issues his recommendation the end of January. The House has until about mid-April to issue its budget, and the Senate has until about Memorial Day to issue its budget. We are hoping that there will be a joint a local aid resolution, which is has been done in the past. It was not done last year. The Mass Municipal Association is calling for that this year. Hopefully that will happen, because then there's agreement on what state aid is, and before people start having before cities and towns, or before towns start having town meeting.
Great, thank you. Anyone else?
Just on the prior year unexpended articles for capital, is that from savings? Is that unspent because the items were no longer needed, or unspent and will be spent?
It is, it's unspent and will not be spent. And the only way that we can use that money is to reappropriate it to something else. And it comes from savings in other projects. In particular, the library is one that comes to mind. I believe we had $40,000 in a capital article to paint the library, and when we got the bid, it was $20,000. So about $20,000 of that is just from that one item. And we can't just go spend it on another capital item without it being reappropriated, because that money is appropriated for a particular project. So this is a combination of unexpended proceeds from the last 3 or 4 years worth of capital.
Okay, thank you.
And this is higher than what we typically see, but it really has to do with that library, the bid on the library.
Anyone else? Anyone from the public on the revenue side? Okay.
So in terms of expenditures, obviously, we're a service provider organization, and the demands for services don't necessarily change because we don't have the money to provide those services. We provide services to lots of different segments of the community, to students, to seniors, to residents. We need to make sure we're focusing on service levels and not employees. Sometimes in years past, that's been something that has clouded the discussion. Hopefully not this year. Our expenditures are divided into several different categories: departmental expenditures, non-appropriated costs, our 3 enterprise funds, water, sewer, and solid waste, and then any other articles that have a financial impact, particularly our capital article. So we went through the 5-year forecast a couple of months ago. At that time, I presented to you that I expected, based on projected revenues and expenditures, we would have a deficit of about $550,000 in fiscal 15, $695 in 16, and so forth. So based on that forecast, we started the fiscal 15 budget process. Each department was given a target, and those targets added up to that deficit of $549,000. At the time, I knew the revenue projections were conservative, not really conservative, but they certainly were conservative. I wasn't projecting any increase in state aid, and we will see a 5.5% increase in state aid. So that helped. Departments are free to submit requests that are over target, and we did have requests come in of about $1.95 million, bringing the total deficit to $2.5 million. But $800,000 of that deficit was an over-target request for the pavement management program. And so I just want to point that out, because in years past we've seen that as a separate capital article, but it is, because we're going to fund some level within the operating budget, it was submitted as an operating budget expense. But still significant over-target requests, all for services and personnel that is needed, but obviously not that we are able to fund at this point in time. So as I mentioned, I wasn't initially projecting much of an increase in Chapter 70, but we will see a decent increase in Chapter 70. We had a much better than expected health insurance renewal, which helped helped with the bottom line here. But this still leaves the school department $450,000 short of the superintendent's recommendation, which obviously is a big concern. That's a big gap. It's a little bit larger of a gap than we had last year, so that is of concern. And we're also looking at funding each of the departments essentially at the fiscal 14 service levels, which are less than what we've seen even a couple of years ago, with some very minor exceptions. Everybody's favorite slide here: non-discretionary, less discretionary, discretionary. I'm sorry, I don't know how else to describe it. We have things that we absolutely have to do. We have things that we are required to do, and then we have some things, everybody's favorite things, I think, that are discretionary. And it's just, it is the way of the world. So non-discretionary expenses are debt service payments, our insurances, retirement assessment, and cherry sheet charges. Cherry sheet charges are charges that we receive from the state for services that the state provides or are provided on a regional level, such as mosquito control, such as regional transportation or MBTA, those types of things. The state provides those to us, and we are required to pay those. The good news here is that there was about a 1% decrease in the percentage of the budget that goes to non-discretionary items. So we're making some progress there. Our less discretionary, or where we have some discretion, education, we're required to provide education, but the level of education that we can provide, you have some say on a local level. It probably doesn't feel like it, but you do have a little bit of say. Public safety, and some of the services that Public Works provides, specifically plowing, keeping our roads open and passable during storms for public safety. And then discretionary, Department of Public Works, road maintenance. This is something we've exercised a whole lot of discretion on in the past, and you can tell by the state of our roads. Library and senior center, administrative and land use offices, capital. We've had a wide fluctuation from year to year in what we've spent on capital because we do have more discretion there. And then other warrant articles with a financial impact. So first, debt service. We will be spending $2.8 million in fiscal 15, again, excluding what we will need to spend on the middle school, high school project. This is a decrease of about $55,000. This graph shows how we pay for that debt service. So of that $2.8 million debt service payment in fiscal 15, $874,000 will come from taxes. So that is the exempt debt tax that we will raise over and above the 2.5% to cover debt that the voters have authorized to be exempt from Proposition 2.5. We have $770,000 worth of sewer debt that will be paid for through sewer debt payment, sewer betterment payments. We have $63,000 that will come from water betterment payments. Another $10,000 from septic receipts, bond premium, and then from the Massachusetts School Building Authority for the primary school project, $534,000. So the net impact of that $2.8 million debt bill for fiscal 15 to the operating budget is $552,000. And you can see that has come down some even since 2013. And that will go down over the next several years. This next slide is something that was in the financial forecast that shows the decrease in debt service that we will see over the next 5 years. And we've talked about this in the past. That impact in the impact in 15 from slide to slide is a little different because we had a change in a debt service schedule. But we're essentially at the same level with a minor adjustment. But you will see in 2016 projecting about the same level of debt service that will impact the operating budget, the general fund. But then we will see a decrease of about $120,000 in fiscal 17. And then it will start to drop off pretty significantly. And I've mentioned to you in the past, I think one idea that we need to consider strongly is capturing that decrease and putting it into roads. That would be one way where we would be able to fund our road maintenance at a higher level without impacting other departments, because we're just shifting money that we were paying to debt service somewhere else, so we won't be taking from any other department to do that. The next category is insurances, and this is just about the best news that we could have in fiscal 2015. Our health insurance renewal is 0% increase. The average for Maya communities was 5.3%, and we have a 0, which will result in a savings about $165,000 townwide. It's about $110,000 for the school, and then the rest for town departments. And I think interesting to note, in fiscal 2015, we will spend less on health insurance than we spent in 2012. I'd like to see that in a headline in a newspaper article, because I think that is, it's so significant. When people talk about, you hear cities and towns, and health insurance is the big budget buster, and it's big for us. 15% of our budget goes to employee, active and retired employee benefits. But to see a decrease year after year after year is just, it's very significant. I can't say enough or offer enough thanks both to the Board of Selectmen and the Public Employee Committee for negotiating, for both sides agreeing to sit at the table and to negotiate on plan design change. We were able to make significant changes last fiscal year that over a period of 3 years will save the town about $600,000. So that is really something that the community should be proud of. We also will see a 0% increase in our general liability and workers' comp insurances, and we also locked in for fiscal 16 not more than 2.5% increase for both of those as well. We have a really great opportunity with MIA. The Massachusetts Interlocal Insurance Agency provides insurance benefits to, I want to say, close to 200 of the 361 cities and towns in Massachusetts. They provide very competitive rates. They provide good products. They provide a lot of training for us free of charge. We partake in training through MIA that we wouldn't be able to afford. Our Department of Public Works, our police, fire, office personnel, they offer a lot of webinars, so people don't even have to leave. There's no cost associated with that. On top of that, when we participate in those programs, they give us a credit on our premium. So we, on an annual basis, probably receive close to $20,000 back on our insurance premiums because we're participating in professional development training or undertaking activities, loss prevention activities. So it's really, it's a very great program for cities and towns in Massachusetts. In terms of our retirement assessment, here's where the good news stops. We will be seeing a huge increase in our assessment, $106,000 in fiscal 2015. It is typical that we see an 8 or 9% increase in our retirement assessment. That's just how it goes. When times are good, it's 8 or 9. When times are bad, it's 8 or 9. It is 14.6 in fiscal 15. Two reasons for this. This is the final year of the phase-in for a change in the way that they are valuing the town's portfolio, valuing the benefits. And we also have one early retirement that is a disability retirement on the job injury, which is impacting us for the first time in fiscal 2015. So this is significant. We do have the opportunity to pay 100% of the assessment on July 1, and we receive a 2% discount for doing that, and we do that, and we save about $16,000 by doing that. That's already taken into account with that $105,000. So next, education. As I mentioned, there still is a significant gap between what I have recommended in my budget and the superintendent's recommendation. My budget recommendation represents a 3.5% increase for Lunenburg Public Schools for fiscal 2015. That is a total increase of $564,000. The superintendent's recommendation, if you factor in the health insurance renewal, when the superintendent put together her recommendation, she was using the 5.3 or 6%, which I had suggested that she use. So if you factor in the actual health insurance renewal, the delta we're looking at is $450,000. One item that has yet to be factored in is the savings from the net metering credits. And we're still working on trying to figure out the accounting of that with the state in terms of how the state wants us to account for it. I have identified here that that the gap should be reduced by another $30,000. I just got information today from John Londa, the facilities director at the school, and he is the most knowledgeable person in town about utilities and how much we're paying, not just for the school, but for the town as well. And he mentioned to me that he thought we would be bringing in just under $120,000 when that facility is fully operational. The split is about 50-50. I mean, we can't go with 120. That would be too much. We need to see how that facility is going to come online, the solar farm, and how it's going to produce. But what I'm hoping that we can do in the first year is that any of those credits that we take in, and I say credits, but we're actually going to take in cash, that we bring those in as an expenditure credit. So instead of worrying about how we're going to appropriate and are we going to bring in enough to cover the appropriation, that in the first year, whatever we take in is just going to come in as an expenditure credit against that utility line. So we're not worried about saying we're going to budget for $100,000, we're going to appropriate $100,000, and then we only bring in $75,000, but we spend $100,000. So I think we're going to do it that way if the town accountant will let me for the first year until we know what we will be bringing in. But I think between that $30,000 and $50,000 is on each side of the equation is what we'll see in fiscal 15. So that has not been taken into account here. So probably the gap is around $400,000 at this point in time. Still very, very significant. But when we get to the bottom line here, you'll see that we have $90,000 left on the table already. So, which we haven't had that before. And then our Monty Tech assessment, we do have the unofficial assessment. It is $778,000, higher than normal, but in the current fiscal year, in fiscal 14, after the budget was adopted, I think in September, the state notified Monty Tech that minimum contributions had changed, and I think the Finance Committee, I think we talked about this at least, maybe, I'm not sure at the Board of Selectmen level. But what happened is, with all of the Monty Tech member communities, there was a change in the required contribution for fiscal 2014 based on a change in the formula. And Lunenburg, of course, had the highest impact, $49,000. So our minimum contribution went up $49,000. Monty Tech notified us that they weren't going to be looking for that in fiscal 14, but they would include that in the fiscal 15 assessment. So if you back out that amount, the increase that they are projecting is 2.8%. I'm still not 100% sure with this $49,000. I originally thought it just would be an increase in year after year, that our contribution, I mean, assuming that the enrollment stayed about the same, but the way it looks like it's just a one-time thing, which doesn't make sense to me, and I'll be anxious to hear when Monty Tech comes in to talk about this. If this is just a one-time payment that we need to make, if there's any way that we can make it in fiscal 14, it makes sense to make it in fiscal 14 and not be taking $50,000 out of the operating budget. That being said, we have a snow and ice deficit that we need to deal with. So I don't know that it's possible to pay that in 14 given the budget constraints that we have, but if it is and it's a one-time payment, then I would recommend that that's how we deal with that. But again, I'm not 100% sure. In terms of our police department, we have 14 full-time and 15 reserve officers. We have 2 patrols that are out almost all of the time, with the exception of 8 shifts per week. We have 3 when we have a full complement of officers, and we're almost to full staff there. The chief did submit an above-target request for 3 full-time officers and for some additional funding for the desk officer, which is the backfilling of the lobby coverage that we have. That over-target request is $209,000. Obviously, you will hear from the chief. He's put together all kinds of data and statistics on why we need those 3 officers. I think we need those 3 officers. There's no way we can afford those 3 officers. If we had that state aid, we could, we could fill the gap between the superintendent's budget and my recommendation. We could fund officers. We could fund additional personnel in the fire department. We could do a better job with roads. But we don't have it. And there are a lot of reasons why we should, but the bottom line is, unless we have additional revenue, we can't afford to do these things. I mentioned the local traffic fines. The chief and I have talked also about implementing towing fees. And this is something that he will bring forward to the Board of Selectmen as well, sometime between now and the end of the fiscal year. Towing fees are very interesting, and you may or may not have seen articles in the newspaper. Can be very controversial and very competitive, a very competitive bid process. But when the police department requires a vehicle to be towed because it's parked somewhere where it shouldn't be, there's a fee associated with that. And the town can, through contract with the towing company, the town can participate in that fee. So for instance, this is something we did this when I worked for the town of Chelmsford. The city of Lowell does it there. City of Fitchburg does it, actually. So you have a company bid on the tow and say they bid $100 per tow. The town, you can negotiate. The town, you could share 50-50 on that. So that's something that we should be doing, and we can do, and we will be doing that now that the city of Fitchburg is doing it. It's a little more commonplace here, so we will be looking at that. Not sure what we can expect in terms of revenue, but it's fairly significant based on what I've heard. So we will have more information coming on that. We're also still looking at regionalized services. We did just receive a grant from MRPC. They will be doing a feasibility analysis for regional animal control. We are going to apply in the next round, which should be probably next month, to that same grant program for regionalized lockup, for them to look at feasibility of regionalized lockup. We would like to be a regional lockup facility if that's possible. We have a great facility, and we would much prefer to have other cities and towns use their manpower to bring their people here than for us to have to expend time and energy to take people somewhere else. So we will be looking at that, and I do expect that MRPC will fund that grant request as well. Next, fire department. Currently, we provide coverage 6 a.m. to 6 p.m., Monday to Friday, plus some holiday weekends. Response times remain a concern, but obviously we do the best that we can with the funding that we have. The National Fire Protection Association and the American Heart Association recommends that fire or EMT paramedics be on the scene within 4 minutes. That's not something that we can do on a regular basis, particularly on weeknights and evenings where we don't have personnel in the station. Obviously, the quicker that our rescue can get out to somebody who is in need of services, the better chance that person has in a positive outcome. So that is a concern. The fire chief put in an above-target request to provide coverage 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, with 2 personnel in the station, particularly 2 personnel that can man the ambulance so that we can come closer to that response time. Again, this is something that there's every reason in the world why we should have that. We're a community of over 10,000, a large community geographically, very difficult to get timely from the station to certain parts of the community. But again, this is not something that we can fund within our current constraints. The chief is looking at ambulance fees, and we'll be bringing a proposal to the selectmen, again, before the end of the fiscal year, a request to increase ambulance fees, because we want to make sure the fees that we're charging are covering the service that we're providing. And it's been a number of years. I believe it was 2009 was the last time that we increased fees, and obviously costs have risen due to inflation. In terms of dispatch, as you know, we did transition to our regional dispatch effective July 1st of 2013. This meant that we did lose our personnel in the station that was there 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We do backfill with that desk officer 8 to 12 hours a day. Right now we're doing 12 hours, 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. We may, as we get closer to the end of the year, have to cut that back, not because we don't need it, but because of budgetary issues. That desk officer, we actually do have a uniformed officer. We had originally thought maybe we could do a combination of civilian and uniformed officers. It makes the most sense to have a uniformed officer there because that person can also perform lockup observation and also help with a number of things, different types of permits and assistance that only a police officer can provide. So that's what we're doing right now. It's working well. When the police chief presents his budget request to you, he's got all kinds of data about the types of service calls that they're providing, and the amount of service and justification for additional funding there. But again, without any increase in revenue, we can't do better than what we're doing right now. Our assessment for Neshoba Valley Regional Dispatch District in fiscal 15 will be the same or slightly less than it is in fiscal 14. Probably in fiscal 16, we will be looking to add another community, so we should expect to see a decrease in our assessment, because we will only add at this point a community that doesn't increase the need for personnel there. So we do have some bandwidth available. And there are a number of smaller communities that are interested in joining the district. And the nice thing about the district is we split everything right now 4 ways. Lunenburg is the biggest player at that district. We have the most calls, probably the most complicated calls, and we pay the same as Devon's that probably has, I don't know, Chief, what, a tenth? I think a tenth would be a stretch, a tenth of the calls that we have here, but they paid this. So that is a tremendous benefit to us, that we are paying the same as the other communities. So last year, for the first time in the budget document, we included some initiatives and efficiencies, and where we've made those, I'm going to touch on those, add in some new things. And in the budget document, the narrative in the budget document is far more extensive than what is in here in this presentation. But what we will be looking at in 15 is to finalize the feasibility study for regional lockup. As I mentioned, looking at implementing a municipal towing contractor service policy and agreement. We will be implementing a K-9 program in probably yet this fiscal year. The town did receive a grant for 100% of the cost of a K-9 unit, a dog and cost associated with training an officer. So we will have a K-9 unit available. And this is important because right now we have to call in the state police if we need K-9. And K-9 is used, we've used it a number of times just in the last year where we've had a missing person in some of the drug-related activities. We use a K-9, so we were very fortunate to get a grant that will cover 100% of the cost for 3 years for the K-9 unit. As I mentioned, we'll be looking at updating bylaws and fines for traffic infractions. The police department is looking at a train the trainer program. There are a number of trainings that both police and fire personnel are required to undertake on an annual basis. At least on the police department side, these were always provided free of cost, the training. We would pay the personnel to attend the training, but the training itself was free of cost. These trainings were provided at the state level. There is now a fee associated with these, and it's pretty significant. And it's pretty significant just to send personnel to training, even when you're not paying anything for the training. So we will be looking at sending a couple of personnel to the training and get them certified so that they can come back here and do training here, so it will be more cost effective. And then on the fire side, we will be, as I mentioned, looking at ambulance fees. Within the Department of Public Works, we're looking at providing a level service in fiscal 15, increasing the snow and ice appropriation from $250 to $260, increasing the funding for our road program from 107 to 128. There was an above-target request for $800,000 for full implementation of our pavement management program, which we can't afford to do, but hopefully we will continue to make progress on what we can set aside in our operating budget for the pavement management program. This next graph shows our snow and ice expenditures over the last 10 years. The blue line represents the appropriation and the purple line represents the expenditure. The area in between the two lines is our deficit on an annual basis. Yeah, it's not showing on the slide, but the 10-year average expenditure for snow and ice is $286,000. We, in the last several years, have been budgeting $250,000, but our 5-year average is $328,000, and fiscal 14 is going to blow that out of the water. So we have been very fortunate, even though we've been budgeting, up to $100,000 less in our deficit. We've almost always been able to make that up within the operating budget, either because we didn't spend as much as we expected, or we curtailed some of our expenditures so that we would be able to absorb that. Snow and ice is a legal deficit, which means that it can be brought forward into the next fiscal year, but it needs to be raised within the levy limit. So to the extent possible, it makes sense to be able to fund the deficit within the current year, because then you're not robbing the next year of resources. In terms of initiatives and efficiencies within the Department of Public Works, we identified the need for a fleet management software program, which would enable us to make better data-driven decisions, reduce maintenance and operating costs, ensure regulatory compliance. We did purchase a fleet maintenance management software program, and we are using that. We also identified implementing a system to plan, track, and report daily work within the department, and you know that we've done that as well, because we showed you at least the first set of reports, and we will be using that information for the same purpose. We also identified the need to update our pavement management program, and we are working with an engineering firm on that. And in particular, we're looking at some advice on how we can better spend the money that we have allocated? What are some of the different types of applications that we can use instead of just going, right now the way it's set up, we would be essentially doing pretty significant mill and overlay of roads. But as you know, we tried last year a new application on a couple of different roads. We tried doing smaller segments. We'd like to be as knowledgeable as possible so that we're spending the money in the most effective manner, because we know we're not going to get to repair these roads before they fail in all cases. In public buildings and facilities, what we did here, the big thing that we did last year is we pulled out all of the utility costs for all of the departments except the library, put them into public facilities so that we have one group managing all of those costs, so that we can make sure that we're taking advantage of any opportunities we have in utility savings. And our facilities director on the town side, and actually on the school side as well, both of those individuals work with our Green Communities Task Force, and that task force has recently put together a grant application, a significant grant application for funding from the Green Communities program to implement some energy savings measures within all of the buildings. So that's what we're looking for here, that we know what we're spending. We're making sure there are no errors in utility bills, because there can be errors in utility bills, and making sure that we're working with our task force, because there's a significant amount of money that's available through that Green Community program. We still have a goal of purchasing street lights. I thought we were making some progress. The consultant we were working with doesn't seem to be so interested in us, but we weren't paying anything either. So I need to find somebody. Goodwill only goes so far. He did. He worked with me in another town, so we need to get that going. I think this is something, if the Green Communities Task Force will take it, I think I will give it to them to run with, because there's some money to be saved in purchasing the street lights and converting them to LED. I think we were talking somewhere in the neighborhood of $40,000 to $50,000. So that's significant. That's something that we need to move on. And then our solar projects. We finally, after close to 2 years, completed negotiations on that. The project is under construction, expected to be operational in the beginning of May of this year. So hopefully we might even see some savings in the current fiscal year. Hopefully we will see a full year's worth of savings in fiscal 15. But again, we need to make sure that project gets online. Our library, we do have a minimum appropriation requirement for the library that the state gives us. For fiscal 15, it's $361,000. As we're doing in the current year, we're going to pay that through both the general fund appropriation and the revolving fund, the fines revolving fund. So $353,000, or essentially what is in the budget for the current fiscal year, is what the general fund will pay in fiscal 2015, and just under $8,000 will come from the revolving fund. So we will meet our minimum required spending for the library, meaning the library will be fully certified. The library will continue to operate on the same schedule that we have now, but no more than that. The library, I was just looking on the library's the website, the new website, and there's all kinds of material that is available, books and other material available online. So that's an exciting opportunity, and all kinds of programs and activities going on at the library. In our administration and land use offices, we're looking at essentially the same level of funding in fiscal 15. You will recall back in fiscal 13 we had some pretty significant cuts to administration and land use. The one increase is we're looking at increasing our IT staff from currently 1.5 FTEs to 2.25. In fiscal 12, we were at 2.5. This is 1.5 FTEs is what we have across the board, all departments, including the school. So we're looking at increasing to 2.25. We would have 2 full-time and 1 part-time, and this was still less than what we had in fiscal 12. And again, for all of our administrative use of IT, all of our educational use, public safety, I mean, it's amazing that anything gets done with 1.5 staff members. What we are able to do, the value add here is with this increase in staff, we're able to host our email and our email archiving internally. We currently pay $7,000 for those 2 services annually. So we won't need to do that. We'll have a small capital expense associated with that we can manage, but we will be able to save $7,000 a year. We will improve and update the website content, looking at developing an intranet site where our own users can go for technical assistance, and also to provide some additional training opportunities for staff in terms of IT. In the Selectman's office, through the retirement of the incumbent, I'm looking to replace that administrative assistant with an assistant to the town manager position, sort of a combination. We did, up until a couple of years ago, actually have 2 full-time people in addition to myself in that office. This would be still 1 person, but hiring somebody at a higher level, and try that, and I'm thinking that probably will do almost as well as the staff that we had before. So there is some funding for a salary at a little bit of a higher level. And then we have another retirement. Our planning director is retiring, and I'm proposing that we replace that position with the director of land use. Not tied to that title, community development director, whatever you want to call it. Somebody that will have increased coordination, responsibilities, supervisory responsibilities over land use as a whole. Somebody who will be involved in economic development for the town. We have some really incredible opportunities available to us through economic development that we haven't taken advantage of. We have with the Summer Street, the redevelopment of Summer Street, that is still a few years out, but we have an incredible opportunity with Summer Street. We have commercial land that's vacant, industrial land that's vacant. We need to take a hard look at that corridor. That is an area that is ripe for some economic development for the town that could bring in taxes, services, just something that we can't let that pass up. There are other opportunities in that area that we could partner with the city of Fitchburg in particular, but we need to have somebody who can dedicate some time and has some expertise in that area. We have opportunities with MRPC, the Montechusett Regional Planning Agency. That agency gets lots of money from the state and federal government to provide services to its member communities, and we don't take as much advantage of MRPC as we should. And they, on an annual basis, have money available. They provide services, so they have all kinds of, they have community development planners, transportation planners. We need to make better use of that service, but we need to have a staff person who is able to make the best use of that. I have included in the budget an increased salary, and it's not It's not what I want to see. I'd like to see it higher. But I'm concerned about what the community will accept in terms of paying a salary for that position. But I will assure you that every dollar we put into that position is a dollar less that we're going to spend in legal services. We spend $125,000 on an annual basis in legal services. I just was on an email chain from all of the area communities asking, how much do you spend in legal services? The town of Groton was the closest, $90,000. Most communities our size, or maybe slightly smaller, they're spending $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 a year in legal services. We are spending a tremendous amount of money in legal, and a lot of it is to supplement what we don't have here on staff. So every dollar we put into the salary for whatever you want to call this person is going to be a dollar less that we spend on legal. So I don't see that there's any impact. So this is something that I feel very strongly about, because it is important. If we need to take advantage of every opportunity that is available to us. But we need to know what the opportunities are. And we need to bring the right person in to get us moving in the right direction in terms of some of the efficiencies and opportunities in land use and administration. We implemented an online purchase requisition form, and we have almost every department using that. We have all of the major departments. There are only a couple small departments that aren't using that right now. So we're not walking paper from building to building. We're not manually signing paper. It has been a tremendous time savings in the selectman's office, and I think everybody is much happier using that. And it was not, we didn't pay any extra for it. This is something that we had available to us, but we finally were able to implement this. We are now looking to implement electronic distribution of our direct deposit advices and W-2s. So instead of having, I know this is rocket science, instead of having somebody stuffing checks with not checks and distributing that, we can send this out electronically. This is something that we don't currently have available to us, but we are funding within the fiscal 14 budget. So we will be doing that, and that, I have to say, is going to save at least a couple of hours on at least an every other week basis. It's significant. I need those hours that person has to be doing other projects. We will be putting an additional amount of funding into our tax title processing. We've talked about this before, where we have a backlog, not on leaning properties, because we do a very good job with that, but on the next phase, getting them into land court, getting those tax titles paid. So we have additional money in fiscal 2015 to continue to move that. We've had good success where, when an attorney sends a letter to people who are delinquent, we get a better response from that. So we've had collections as a result of that. And, we are prepared to move forward as far as foreclosure if that's what we need to do, because we have a responsibility to make sure that people pay taxes, and unfortunately in certain circumstances this is what needs to be done. In terms of our capital budget, we started the capital planning process a little bit earlier this year. The capital planning committee worked very diligently, met weekly, put a lot of time and effort into reviewing all of the capital requests, went through and prioritized every single capital request that came in. We had ended up with 23 requests for funding in fiscal 2015, totaling just under $1.4 million, the largest of which is a replacement of fire engine number 1, $550,000. I am proposing that we have a capital budget of $689,152 in fiscal 2015. Everything but the 4 highlighted items on the list would be included in that funding request. The fire truck, what I am proposing is that we finance that over a period of 5 years. We would have the opportunity, because we have a little savings, a little bit of money left on the table. If the finance committee and selectmen are interested, we could cut that to 4 years. We could still do that. But right now I'm proposing 5 years. I would also propose that we don't plan on purchasing another fire truck until this fire truck is paid off. Unfortunately, we bought our trucks within a short period of time, so this is going to squeeze some life out of some of the trucks that maybe they don't quite have, but we need to get them on a cycle where we're not seeing in a 6-year period the need to replace 3 trucks because they're expensive. So that's how we would fund the capital budget. So if the $125,000 is what the cash impact would be of that fire truck in fiscal 15. So in fiscal 16, we already know $125,000 of our capital spending is going to go to the debt service on that truck. The 4 items that are not included are the street sweeper, painting of town hall, a shade structure at Turkey Hill Middle School, and a speed sign for the police department. The street sweeper, we are going to do some additional analysis on that to determine whether or not it makes sense to keep that as an in-house project or to outsource that. So we need to do that for fiscal 16. Town hall, what I would like to do is to put together a committee like we did with the DPW building right away to start working on a plan for this building with the intent of bringing a plan forward at the fall town meeting 2014. I think we can do it in that amount of time, and we can put together a plan on how we're going to fund whatever we're going to do here. But I'm not sure that it makes sense to do anything right now because we're not 100% sure what this building is going to be, whether it's going to have an addition. I think we're just a little too premature 10 years late, if that makes sense. So the other 2 items, the shade structure at Turkey Hill Middle School and the police, the speed sign for the police department, we don't have the funding for those 2 things. They'll be, if the departments are interested, they can submit those in fiscal 16, and hopefully we'll have funding in fiscal 16 for those 2 items. Almost at the end here, our recycling and solid waste program. We fund recycling through our operating budget and the solid waste program through an enterprise fund. The costs associated with the recycling program and some memberships that we have for the household hazardous waste program at Devon's and some of those things, $193,574. In the solid waste enterprise fund, not proposing any increase in bag fees, where I think in year 3 of a 10-year contract, that program is doing really well, no need to increase bag fees. Our non-appropriated costs, I had mentioned these before, regional transit assessments, tuition assessments, the choice and charter tuition assessments, mosquito control district, and also that deposit of $74,000 back into the stabilization fund to make sure that we maintain that 5%. I went back and looked at the history of our bond rating. In the last 5 years, our bond rating has gone up 4. We went from an A-, we started at an A-, and we're at a AA+. That's another thing that the community should be should be proud of. Really, absolutely unheard of. Now, we probably were lower than we needed to be, but I'm still, I can't, I'm still really overwhelmed by the fact that we're a AA+ community. Same as the state of Massachusetts with what? $3 billion in stabilization fund. And it couldn't come at a better time. It couldn't come at a better time. So that's something the community should be proud of. So the good news, after putting all of this together, there were some changes, particularly with the health insurance. The health insurance renewal always comes out the minute I press send to send the budget out. That's how I know it's going to happen. So I did it, and it happened, and that resulted in one of the reasons we have $90,000 sitting on the table. And I hope that as we go through this process and we hear more from the state, that we'll have more sitting on the table. And I really genuinely would like to have input from the Finance Committee, would like the Finance Committee and the Board of Selectmen to listen to all of the requests from the departments and to decide how we're going to spend that money, or if we're going to spend that money. So the next steps, Finance Committee will begin hearing from departments next Thursday, March 6th. I mentioned this already. House Ways and Means budget is due out mid-April. Town meeting is May 3rd. Town election is May 17th. The schedule of the Finance Committee hearings next Thursday, you are scheduled to hear from the library. Oh, this I didn't update, so you have capital planning. So you missed capital planning. We have library, capital planning, Department of Public Works, and unclassified. On March 13, police, fire, and land use and administration. On March 20th, we have Lunenburg Public Schools and Monty Tech. I think this might be a little different than what you have. This might not be completely accurate. Council on Aging. And then the final week, Sewer Enterprise Fund, any other financial articles, and then you'll have your budget hearing on the 27th. Then you will, either that evening or shortly thereafter, need to make your final recommendation, write up your report, and we will prepare the warrant and for distribution shortly thereafter. So that is the end of my presentation, and I would be happy to answer questions.
Carrie, I have a question with respect to some of the non-discretionary insurances. Mm-hmm. We're looking at 0% increase in general liability, workers' comp, health insurance renewal. Sounds like you've locked in no greater than a 2.5% increase in fiscal 16. How much do we depend upon 0% increases in terms of what we can expect to pay in future years? What I'm concerned with is if we take money that we would have expended on insurances and put it toward other things, then when the insurances go up, we don't have the money to cover it. Yeah. So perhaps you could comment on that.
The general liability and workers' comp, we've done well with those, at least in the time that I've been with the town. We have good experience on workers' comp. General liability, we do as well as we can with loss prevention activities, particularly at the school. John Londa does a phenomenal job working with our insurance company. So I don't think we have a whole lot of exposure there. I think 0 to 2% or 2.5% is something that we can expect to see unless we have some major catastrophe. Obviously, health insurance, we can't expect to see 0, but we saw 0.66 last year, and it's been low. It's been, our renewal has been very low, far lower than the medical inflation trend. We've been at 5% or less for several years. That is a tough one, but we still have opportunities to make improvements in our plans, which will be more cost effective. Maya is doing a pilot program with the town of Chelmsford on locking in rates for 3 years for health insurance. I said to our rep, we'd like to do a pilot program. Maya is doing the pilot program only with communities that have the GIC look-alike, the benchmark plan. We don't have the benchmark plan. Hopefully they will do something long-term with us. I'm going to keep pushing them because we certainly could be a test case for low health insurance renewals. But that's a big concern. We're spending townwide, including the school, $3.5 million on health insurance. So any percentage increase is a big increase. So, I think it's a concern that we're doing well right now. Our local receipts we're not looking at big increases.
Right.
So our revenue's it's not like our revenue's increasing 5% and our expenses are increasing 1%. I think it's something we have to be careful of. I don't think we should necessarily take that $90,000 and go hire a police officer. I'd like to go hire a police officer or a firefighter or a DPW worker or put the money into the schools. But is it going to be there next year? I can't guarantee that.
Thank you. Other questions? Questions from the public?
I'm sorry, Mark.
Yes, Terry.
I guess actually, my question more goes to when the departmental presentations come, it would be really helpful to me to see, especially from fire, an inventory of the big trucks that we're talking about, trying to space out how we're purchasing those over time, so that maybe there's a 20-year look at, so if we're making a decision about doing 5 years of financing, given that we haven't paid off the other truck. To me, I would just like, that would be helpful to me as part of the presentation when the fire department comes forward.
Yeah. In the meantime, in the capital budget, and I gave that to you a couple of meetings ago, you'll find 5 years. I think you have 5, not 10. Most departments project on 5 years. So you'll see in that 5-year period what's projected.
No, I guess what I'd like to know, and when I ask for inventory, I guess what I mean is, how many big trucks are there, and when were they purchased? So, and given that, like part of the reading material was the anticipated replacement life based on recommendations. That to me, it would just be helpful to see what's going to happen 6 years out.
Yeah.
So, and again, I don't remember now off the top of my head when the big truck that was purchased, when the debt service runs out on that. But that would seem to go longer than it. In 5 years seems reasonable, but since we only see 5 years and we don't see what's in year 6, it would be interesting to me to see.
Okay.
Anything else? Okay. At this time, I'd just like to say thank you to Kerry and to all the department heads. We appreciate the amount of time and energy that goes into pulling all this information together. We do have more work in front of us. I'm very pleased to see the number of initiatives that we're taking to try and either get grants or additional funding or look at regionalization. Those are all things that we should be considering. I'm also very pleased that we've got a number of positive things to talk about and negotiate for a change. In years past, it's been, how are we going to cut? Who are we going to cut? Where are we going to cut? This year, sounds like we've got a little bit more flexibility, and that's great. I look forward to that dialogue, and I'm sure the rest of the committee does as well. Just to reiterate the schedule, we will be meeting every Thursday night during the month of March. Those meetings will all be televised. I would encourage people to either tune in or attend in person if you can. We look forward to getting as much input from the public as we can. We don't have to wait until the public hearing at the end of the process. Anyone should feel free to come out and participate in any of our meetings. So, Kerry, once again, thank you very much. Nice job. Okay, so we do have additional agenda items for this evening. I will certainly understand if folks don't want to stick around for some of this business. What I'd like to do with just some consideration for the town manager. We do have town manager updates on the agenda. I'd like to, if it pleases the committee, I'd like to move that to the next item on the agenda. So, Kerry, if you have anything, that way you don't necessarily need to stay for the rest of the conversation.
I actually don't.
Oh, that's fine, too.
Let's take it in order then.
And Kerry, I'm pleased to see that we do have the capital planning back on the agenda. That meeting was canceled due to the snowstorm 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
So that's great. Okay. We have minutes, I believe, from January 23rd. Has everyone had a chance to review them?
Mm-hmm. I move that we accept the minutes as written for January 23rd.
Second.
Those in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Thank you. Okay, department updates. Capital planning.
Capital planning has ceased meeting. You saw our final recommendations, and you saw that presented by the town manager tonight.
Right. And building reuse.
Building reuse is back in working order again. There's a meeting scheduled for this coming Monday evening, and it's really beginning to look at some of the implementation stages of the recommendations that were made and accepted by the selectmen.
Okay. Brian, anything to report?
Library trustees had a meeting last Thursday. There wasn't much of Finance Committee interest that was there, other than they seem to be pretty much on track for their annual spending expenditures.
Okay. Jason's not here. Karen?
Council on Aging did not meet in February, and I have not connected with the other two.
And we'll be hearing from Monty Tech
Yes.
when they present on whatever that date is. Agriculture?
Oh,
Karen?
nope, nothing on them.
Schools and School Building Committee. The School Building Committee has met this month. We're looking to get the pre-qualifications and bids out. There's a working group that met this week and is meeting again next week to flush out some of the details in terms of the site work and some of the other early work that needs to be done. The school committee did meet last night. Unfortunately, I was not able to attend. Karen, I know you sometimes attend.
I was not at last
You were
night's.
not? Okay. Terry?
I haven't been to a meeting of the Green Communities Committee lately. Basically, they did put in the grant application, and actually, it's going to be interesting to see, since they're going to be able to apply for grants annually, what effect that might have on hopefully bringing down some of the expenditures as they implement a lot of the cost-saving measures that they're trying to through the grant process.
Okay. John?
I have not met with Jack on DPW since our last meeting. PACC tried to meet in February and didn't pull it off. I do have a fiscal year-to-date through January, a look at what PACC's expenditures versus budget is, but I haven't compared it yet to the actual budget, so I'll be able to report on that next time.
Okay. And I did skip over one item. It's actually not on our agenda, but it is in the minutes from our meeting in January 23rd. We had talked about having the Finance Committee contribute a report to the annual town report. This is not something that we've done every year. I did do it last year. And I remember, as I was pulling the information together last year, it seemed very redundant with the budget letter that we publish as part of the warrant for annual town meeting. And I started putting together an outline for that report this year, and I found the same thing. And what was further complicating it is that the annual report is a calendar year, and all of the Finance Committee work is fiscal year. So I found it very awkward and, frankly, more work than value in doing that. So I opted not to do that. We will be publishing our report, our letter, if you will, as part of the warrant for annual town meeting. And we'll all collaborate on that. Okay, fiscal policies. John has pulled together a second draft, revised draft, I should say, pulling together all the consolidated policies. You know, as we were going through the town manager's budget presentation this evening, there were many elements of her proposed budget that line up right with the fiscal policies that we've been working on. So I think it demonstrates the value of this work that we're doing. We're providing guidance, we're following that guidance, and you know, it's just tremendous news that the bond rating has been improved. Puts us in a good place. So, how should we go about this, John? I know you've asked for feedback and incorporated a lot of that feedback.
Yeah, I've actually gotten feedback from a few people in the on the committee, and I've incorporated that feedback in my printed copy. My printer, I show the feedback in red. I don't know if anybody has taken the made okay. Somebody has. Some people have, of course. Brian has, and so we can look at, if everybody has, we can look at that. We could also, if we have time, we could go through page by page perhaps. I do have two specific pages where there is some specific additions or rewording based on the last meeting we had last month, or earlier this month, excuse me. So.
Okay. I'd like to separate style and substance.
Sure.
Okay? I have some comments with respect to style, and I also have a few comments with respect to substance. I'd like to focus on the substance first, if
Sure.
if we can.
Certainly.
How much time do we want to allocate to this? We willing to work on this?
Yeah.
Go through it page by page? Let's do that then.
Please.
Okay. The stabilization funds, we've been through. I think we spent a fair amount of work on that. I'm pretty good with it. Anyone else have any further comments on that page?
None for me.
No.
No.
Okay. The second section, actually, okay, now we're to the style issues. The numbering is a bit awkward. So I'm just going to move past that for now and go to reserve fund,
Could,
right?
before we go to reserve fund, in the stabilization fund policy, we did add, I'm sorry, general reserve fund, excuse me, go ahead.
No.
Actually, I should say page 2. Page 1 is the definition and purpose of the stabilization funds. We're good with that. How about the stabilization fund policy and guidelines? Are we good with that as well? Again, I think this is one that we worked on quite a bit. Okay, then we get to section 3, which is the general reserve fund and purpose. I'm not sure that we want to lock into 50,000. Could we say something like the town's general reserve fund balance is currently set at 50,000 at the beginning of the fiscal year, and just say that it's part of our annual review? We talked about it this year, and we considered increasing it, and we said, no, we'd rather put that money to use somewhere else. But that doesn't mean in future years we wouldn't want to change that, and I don't think we want to lock ourselves into a specific amount. I think it's sufficient to say that we have a reserve. It's currently at 50. We'll review it annually.
Okay,
Does that make sense?
Should we determine it as a percentage? 50,000 is a percentage of the overall budget and not to exceed some percentage? I don't know what that percentage is, but just a thought.
Yeah, when we get to the debt service,
I have that,
I was going to have some similar thoughts around
right,
that.
but that sort of in concert
Not
with
to
that,
exceed a percentage.
whatever, and we can just determine the percentage that we would like to recommend.
on 3C, what would the exact wording be? The town's general reserve fund is currently set at $50,000, right?
Yes, for the fiscal year, and should be reviewed annually during the budget review process.
Well, do you want to just leave it that the general reserve fund balance is set as, through the budget process?
Set annually through the
Annually.
budget process.
Yeah.
At an amount not to exceed a certain percentage.
Well, we already have the
It
percentage
sort of says that
discussion,
up
so,
above, the
yeah.
5%, but we aren't at anywhere near
No, we're
5%, and we will never be close to 5%.
Well, the 5% is by law,
It's
is it
the-
not?
It's state,
Yeah, it is-
the
it
state.
is-
State law.
It's
Yeah.
MGL. Yep.
Right.
we could set a stricter limit, which is really what I think we're talking about here.
That's right.
So it would be added to A as our target or our limit, I think. State law says 5%, we would like to provide a percentage of, whatever that happens to be. 50,000 over, we can either use the omnibus budget or tax levy or something else.
Thoughts?
What would be the benefit of limiting it to a percentage of the budget?
As the budget grows, it would give you a little more latitude, but it would also define for future folks that we want to keep it a minimal amount.
Okay.
We don't want it to start to grow to become something much larger.
Right, so if we leave the definition as is, the MGL allows 5%. 5% would be a huge number
Right.
to put into reserves.
Right now, $50,000 is what, about one half or 1/4 of 1% of the omnibus budget? We should, I think it's closer to 1/4 of 1% of the omnibus budget. If that's the case, I can check that, but I'm pretty sure that's the case.
It is.
We would, why don't we just say not to exceed 1/2 of 1% of the omnibus budget for any fiscal year? Would that work?
What was it right now again?
It's
Well-
right about 1/4%.
So that would be twice what it,
Right.
Yeah.
relatively speaking, it would be twice what it is now.
Exactly. Gives
Yeah.
the town manager some latitude, us some latitude.
And we can always come back to it
Yeah.
in future years.
Right.
But 1/2 of 1% sounds about right.
Okay.
Okay.
Not,
And that would just be added to A. I think you don't have to do anything beyond that. Don't have to add another number. I don't know, it's up to you.
Just lost it.
John's been pretty good at the formatting here. I'll let him.
Okay.
well, the
An
format.
argument for doing it the other way would be to say, I'm sorry, John.
Go ahead, I know, you started first, I interrupted.
The argument for leaving it the way it is basically you have the state definition here under A, and then our stuff would be added to that as B, C, D, whatever.
So what if the state definition is A, the town guideline of not to exceed 1/2 of 1% is B?
My general observation, there's nothing except my general observation working here, is that the state laws seem to be written very expansively to defer actually to the town, keeping us from doing something really stupid, but yet being able to, but with some intellectual humility that they have no idea what the various towns in the Commonwealth are facing in terms of circumstances. Do we need even to refer to the state's 5% limit? Do we need rather to say not to exceed 1/2 of 1% of the omnibus budget?
No, I think to be consistent, we should include the state definition. We've done that on the stabilization fund, right?
Should we then be specific about the fact that this is in fact the state definition?
Yes.
Sure.
Okay, so,
And you could say MGL defines the reserve fund as,
yep,
and then the current paragraph B, other uses of this fund require budgetary transfers at town meeting. I'm not sure that's the case. What we try to do is affect the budgetary transfers without using the reserve fund.
okay.
And then if we're not able to affect a balancing, if you will, through budgetary transfers, then as a last resort, we would fund something from the general reserve.
Okay,
Right, so for example, last year we had the fire department vehicle maintenance that came in relatively early in the year, and there was a request to fund that through the general reserve. And we tabled that and said, no, we want to try and cover that through budgetary transfers during the course of the year. And sure enough, by the end of the fiscal year, we did not have to tap into general reserves. We were able to cover that expense in other, just through budgetary transfers and other line items,
okay.
right?
Well, that doesn't preclude budgetary transfers in other line items, but,
We would only resort to the general reserve if we're not able to fund items through budgetary transfers.
well, your comment where your phrase was "as a last resort," I don't know if you want to put that in there or what.
Not necessarily. I'm trying to get at the notion that the current paragraph B should say, before we use general reserve funds, we should attempt to fund line items through budgetary transfers.
Okay.
Fund unexpected line items through budgetary transfers.
Other funding mechanisms, including?
Okay?
Just
Yeah?
Before we use general reserve funds, I must beg your pardon here, I'm having trouble keeping up. Before we use general reserve funds, we should, or the town should,
explore other funding mechanisms.
explore or employ. Or-
Employs good,
Employees, good.
better.
Yeah. Team wordsmithing. I love it.
This must make for exciting television.
Okay.
Including budgetary transfers at town meeting. That's a good fix.
Okay.
Okay?
Yeah, thanks a lot.
Anything else on general reserves?
Nope.
Free cash?
I had nothing else.
I thought free cash looked pretty good.
Yep.
The priorities, we heard the priorities tonight. The first priority is to replenish the stabilization account. The next priority is capital items with the priority on the roads. And then being clear that, or any other one-time expenditures would be next, and then being clear that free cash, being non-recurring revenue, should not be used for ongoing expenditures.
Right.
So that's good.
Yep.
I like that. Okay, capital projects. Capital projects, by the way, we will review with the
Couldn't get it
capital
done
plan
for some
committee
reason.
when we meet next. Is that the meeting you're going to miss?
Yes.
Okay.
But there'll be members of the committee in attendance, I believe.
Are you-
I'll be there, but I prefer not to present if we can get somebody else to do it. Because I'll be reviewing it with the select.
Presenting the
Capital.
capital plan, yeah. Yeah, we'll need someone to present the capital plan. Well, that would
Well-
ordinarily be Marion.
It would be, and I believe she is still on medical leave, so I don't believe that she'll be able to do this.
Right.
I'll be away. The only thought is, do we try to move capital planning to another meeting when we could be here to do that?
That's certainly an option.
My understanding was that, I think I got this from Karen Brochu, not directly from Kerry, was that Kerry is polling the capital planning committee and trying to find out who is available to make the presentation in lieu of Marion in her absence. And so Kerry may already have set up somebody or some buddies.
We had agreed that I would present it last week.
Okay,
But
then
then the
I'm
meeting, or 2 weeks
updated.
ago, the meeting was postponed. So I will be unavailable next week. If we decided to move capital planning to another subsequent meeting, I can take the lead and I can do the presentation of the capital budget to the group.
Sure.
And I'd be happy to do so.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm just not sure that discussing policies at the same time would be a good idea, given the other presenters.
You mean separate the two?
We would just do the capital planning last on that night,
Yeah,
allow the other people to depart,
right.
and then we could discuss policies and procedures immediately following the capital planning presentation.
Right.
You have the schedule?
Last,
Yeah, I'm looking at the schedule, and it looks like the only one where that might work would be the last meeting, unless,
but that's the public hearing.
Aging is coming as well.
No, Council on Aging is coming with the schools and with Monty Tech, and as I recall, those presentations were long.
There.
Right, but if, oh, you're saying March 6th, Steve's not going to be here.
Right.
We've also talked about the fact that it doesn't have to be Thursday night. I know the Finance Committee used to meet on Saturday for workshops during budget season. I'm willing to do that. I have another trip coming up, by the way. I'm going to miss the schools on March 20th.
What if we were to look at doing it following the land use presentation on Thursday, March 13th? They're on at 8 o'clock. That's historically not a very long discussion.
How about if we ask if land use can go on March 6th,
Flip it.
flip it?
That'd work. That would work.
All right,
So cool-
and then
cool.
just be aware that when it says land use, it also says administration, and that's also when we heard from the treasurer, we heard from all of the
That's
administrative
general government.
offices,
Okay.
and including IT, I
That's right.
believe.
That's a large group.
Mr. Chairman, I'll be at all of the March meetings, so whatever flexibility you need, I just would prefer Steve to be here for that part if we could make it happen.
Yeah, we'd like for him to be here too for that. So
If
we're,
need be, I could present it at any of the meetings.
great, thanks.
So can we actually leave this to work, for you to work with Carrie and come up with a
Yes,
new proposed schedule rather than trying to do it here?
yes. I know it's a lot of departments, but they're relatively short budget
Right.
presentations. They're pretty straightforward.
Yeah.
So that could actually work if we put them in that 7 to 8 time slot with the library, potentially. But let me connect with Kerry.
And we were already prepared to do it 2 weeks ago, so there won't be much for us to have to do it whenever you're ready.
Good. Okay. So the next section is capital. And from a substance standpoint, this is in line with what we had talked about. Any other comments?
I'm comfortable with the wording
Yep.
and the content.
And then the capital planning process, that's really the key piece that we want to review with the capital planning committee.
Exactly.
Make sure that we're in step with their view of the process and everything is as it should be. Okay? And then the next section is borrowing. Regular borrowing, we had said that we wanted to set a minimum threshold of a cost of more than $100,000 and a minimum useful life of at least 10 years. And then we had talked about looking at the trend for the debt burden and seeing if we can't come up with a guideline for an amount, let's say, not to exceed
Right.
for regular borrowing. And I know I have some thoughts on that. Brian, do you as well?
Yeah, what I did is I took the data that was shared with us and I actually just charted it so we can get an idea what that looks like.
Is it just one?
It's one page per, well, I forgot to leave myself one, that's okay. I'll- from my list. What I did is I charted the net regular debt as a percentage of the budget expenditures and net regular debt as a percentage of the net levy.
Yep.
Some taxpayers might want to look at it as a portion of the net levy.
Which is exactly what I did, and I took it one step further. I didn't make copies for folks, but I noticed that as a percent of the budget, we're trending no more than about 2%. So if we increase that to, say, 3%, and then as a percent of the net levy, we're trending something less than 3%, if we increase that to 4%. So I was thinking as a percent of 3% of budgeted expenditures or 4% of the net levy, whichever is less.
Oh.
Is this going to be recommended, or is this going to be a hard number?
This is a policy.
This is a policy. Regular borrowing, the net impact, whatever, what do we call it? Adjusted regular debt.
And this policy is also going to be reviewed with the select board.
Right.
Yes.
So it's not final at all. I was trying to figure out whether we ought to tie the debt limit, regular borrowing debt limit, as a percentage to the levy limit or to the omnibus budget or some budget expenditures. And I wondered, I just don't know the answer to this. It looks like the net levy is a little more stable number than the budget expenditures. Is that correct?
Somewhat. Yep.
They run roughly in parallel here.
I know they do, but the peaks and valleys seem to be less than the net levy. Just looking at Brian's figures.
Right.
I don't know if that's just a better way to frame it, because it's more predictable. And borrowing would affect more than one fiscal year.
Actually, seeing this in chart form, I hadn't thought of this before, but if you were to draw a trend line,
Right.
that trend is going up.
It is going up.
Yes.
So
Yes.
if we set a limit as a percent of either one of those, the trend we're on, we're going to hit that limit not too many years
That's
out.
why I asked that
So,
question.
But
there's another factor that will make this even more difficult. And that is, we did not factor in borrowing for the fire trucks on a 5-year basis. That will be part of the regular borrowing, wouldn't necessarily, so that would throw all these numbers off.
Well, it would, but let's look at it. If we look at the net regular debt for fiscal 14 is $561,000, and if we add to that the
125?
125 for the fire truck, that would bring us at 686. 4% of the levy would be 805. So we're still under the
Still under the levy? Okay.
under the levy. 3% of the budget would be 845. So it's even higher. 3% of the budget is higher than 4% of the levy.
Yes. Yes.
But- see,
Because, yes. Yes.
3% of the budget is higher than 4% of the levy.
Yeah.
So if we said 4%, not to exceed 4% of the levy, that's a lower number than if we said not to exceed 3% of the budget.
And I don't have a particular opinion about that, but I do think that there's some virtue in setting a percentage and not trying to accommodate the trend that we see right here, because this is indeed a zero-sum game. To the extent that we do borrow money, we may run the risk of crowding out other operating expenses.
And
That's why-
you're spot on, John.
That's right.
That's why we need to put a limit on it, to
Yes.
arrest the trend.
And then, now this is probably a little bit more refinement than I should make, because I'm not really that in with it on this. But one of the things that Karen's spreadsheet did is show net borrowing after revenue that proceeded from the borrowing. Think of the sewer betterment fees, the water use fee, the water fees. And I don't know if we can do anything like this, but one of the reasons why we borrow is to is a cost savings over the longer term. I don't know if we can get sophisticated enough to actually frame borrowing as net borrowing after cost reductions in delivering services. You know, with the sewer betterment, yes, we do, because we've got that revenue coming in. But if the borrowing does in fact mean that we need fewer people providing the services, then that is an actual saving to the borrowing. And I'd hate to get to a situation where we have a hard limit on borrowing that may preclude us from making a very good investment in capital expenses or borrowing rather, to make the town more efficient provider of services.
Brian, you look like you have something to say.
I do. On the chart, I put that the net regular debt excludes exempted borrowing. We should also note that it excludes borrowing covered by betterment, I think.
Yes.
Now, if it's a betterment situation that you're talking about, John, then we wouldn't be limiting that. But if it's not a betterment situation, it's some other situation where we might have future savings.
Yeah.
Not sure what that would be, but I can't anticipate everything, obviously can't. None of us can. I'm wondering, since we have set the limit higher than our last 5 years of experience, would we not then have some flexibility to accommodate that?
But these numbers are based on, a lot of these are already being dealt with by betterment. So if you, right? I mean, think about it. You've got the schools, you've got the state funding for the schools, or you've got the sewer,
Sewer
as a
betterment.
better example.
Yep.
But at these percentages, these aren't net of the betterment. These are the gross, in essence, the gross number, are they? Or are they
They're
net of the
net of the
betterment?
No, they're
They're
net.
net.
Net would be, okay.
Yeah.
The
So the net would be,
qualifier net was net of betterments, but I wanted to make sure that
so
was
wouldn't that be
noted
a
in
better one to
our...
gauge it by? Is net, wouldn't net
Yeah,
be
yeah.
the best one to
Net.
gauge it by then?
Yeah, and what I was talking about, the percentages that I was talking about were with respect to the net
Right.
after betterments.
Right. My point was just make sure that we note that.
And then this
Okay.
is also non-exempt debt, right? That's all this is, or is this?
This is
This is not exempt
Exempt
debt.
debt.
This is not, yeah, because exempt debt is funded by the vote, by the
Debt
by the
exclusion.
debt exclusion vote. If you look on page 18 of Kerry's presentation, under the top slide, is a great is an example. I don't know if it's a great example, but it's an example of what I'm talking about. She said, under point 2, host email and email archiving internally, that required a small capital expense is associated with that, but it's a $7,000 annual savings. I'm saying that the capital expense on that, if something like that were associated with regular borrowing, we would then net out the annual savings, I reckon, in order to, if in fact we could quantify it.
I would, my
Am I-
my 2 cents would be that we go, or what I would recommend doing would be going with the original language of the 3 or 4, whichever is lower. And then if at some point down the road it comes up as an issue, without having to worry about, like this, like, it is a great example, the $7,000, but trying to do that on every capital expenditure would be, I think, a bit nightmarish.
Yeah, that's why I began by saying this may be a little bit more fine tuning than we.
Well, no,
But I also think that
But
down
it's
the
a-
road, yeah, if,
It's a concern.
sure, But if 4 years down the road, it's an issue, I think that the Finance Committee at that point would probably bring it up and say, this number's too low.
Need to revise the policy, yeah.
Yeah.
But I think in the interim, for right now, I think it's, the 3 and the 4 is, I think, a reasonable target. And I also think that even going back to the regular borrowing around the fire trucks that we haven't talked about, we've got a fire truck that's currently on there that's going to come off, and at that point, like as this one's on, I don't know, as that comes off, and as some of the other debt is retired, and if indeed as the other debt is retired and Carrie's looking at, whether or not we're going to be applying that towards road repair, then it also looks as if her projections are that number will not be adjusted up. She's looking to try to bring it down, so I don't see a problem with setting the bar low.
So you're arguing in favor of either 3% of the levy or 4% of the budget,
Whichever is lower.
whichever is lower.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we're setting a ceiling.
A range a little bit, yeah.
Yeah. There's a little room from where we are today, but not a lot of room
Right.
because we're concerned with the trend.
Yes.
And we want to set an upper limit so that the trend doesn't become a problem.
And your thumbnail analysis for me is very reassuring that even where even with the fire truck in, we would still be under this limit.
By almost $200,000.
So I'm very reassured that those limits are merely that, limits.
Well, 200,000 if we did 3% of budget, 160,000 if we did 4% of the levy.
Still plenty of room. Plenty of room for non-exempt borrowing.
Right. Non-exempt,
While still containing it.
net.
While containing it, while still containing it.
And I think it really just kind of supports the town manager's efforts to bring the borrowing down.
Well, it does two things. It gives the town manager flexibility to employ borrowing when it makes sense to do it, but within a limit,
Right.
right?
Yep. And mindful of the fact that it may crowd out regular budget expenses, which are necessary. So there's a use cost or an alternate opportunity cost to this borrowing that we have to be cognizant of. Or not we have to be, but the town has to be cognizant
The
of.
counter to that, though, John, is that if we're not funding these large capital items through borrowing, they have an even harder impact on the operating expenses in a given year.
Okay.
So we're spreading the impact over time. Instead of having, if we had to spend $550,000 in 1 year,
Yeah.
we'd have to cut somewhere to fund it.
Well, I understand that. To me, the better approach would be what Terry argued or talked about maybe an hour ago, regarding the fact that we only have a 5-year looking out horizon right now. If we had the luxury of looking out further and maybe doing some accruals, and I don't know if we can ever get to that point, but accruing some funds to attenuate the effect of some of the larger items, that would be ideal. But that may be just moonshine right now.
Yeah. We had, I think at one point, talked about setting up some kind of a stabilization fund for large capital items, but that's sort of what you're addressing
Yeah,
there.
designated stabilization account.
We didn't want to address that yet,
Yeah,
and I think maybe it's maybe something we could add at some point.
maybe premature, but it's in the, it's a mechanism we have.
That's right.
I have done it again by getting so involved in the discussion. I probably screwed up my note-taking. Let me try this. The 1C, the aggregate annual net debt burden, principal and interest payments of all assets financed in this manner does not exceed 3% of budgeted expenditures or 4% of net levy, whichever is lower. Okay,
Perfect.
good.
Perfect.
Thanks.
And then there was a question about paragraph 4, whether we want wording A or wording B.
Sure. And I want to thank both members of the committee who took the time to give me both wordings.
Okay, so there's two parts to this question. One is, after taking into account how the amount necessary to repay the debt. The other is considering the effect that funds to repay the debt. I think they both work.
Right.
We'll probably have a legal review anyway, and the attorneys may very well change that. And then the question is, what should we include the last sentence? The town should repay the debt within 5 years, or just leave that empty. We've already said that the town should repay it over a shorter period as is practical. I think that's enough.
Yeah.
In the
You agree?
Yep.
first version, it says up to a maximum of 5 years, and
Oh, yeah, actually it does. And that's for emergencies.
Yep.
For the larger items, the length of the debt cannot exceed the useful life of the asset.
Exactly. Because emergency borrowing might not involve an asset at all.
Yeah. I'm fine with the first wording.
Okay, let's go with it. That's the first, number 4, right?
the first number 4.
First number 4.
Good, I agree.
Do we really want to put a maximum of 5 years, though? I just worry that we would be,
I'm trying to think what we would borrow that we would want to pay more than 5 years on
I hope
in
nothing.
that kind of situation.
Well,
And if it is, basically all the policies have gone out the window at that point.
That is true. That is true.
if it's that big an emergency,
We'll all know about
it's
it.
probably going to be excluded debt,
Very true. That is true.
right?
Yep.
We're talking non-excluded debt.
Yep, that is true.
MGL does list, and it's been a while since I looked at the statutes, but does list some examples of emergencies, floods, displacements. We had a couple of years ago, the ice storm, and towns can in fact borrow for temporary housing or clothing or food or potable water for their residents to weather the storm. Usually is a short-term thing, and it usually involves consumables. So it's when I talked to Carrie about this sometime late last month, she said that in all likelihood this is moot, in that we usually have a lot of we have enough cash on hand to weather the storm.
Yeah.
Pun intended.
Yeah. Okay, we good with that?
Yes.
And then the last one is, should there be a prohibition against borrowing for non-tangibles like health insurance or unemployment expense? I think the answer is we do not need to say that.
Yeah.
It's got to be a capital asset with a useful life greater than 10 years.
Okay.
Right?
Okay, good.
I think so.
That's splendid. Thanks for your time.
Do you want
Thank
to
you,
do it
John.
again, John?
Thanks, John, for
John, thank you very
Let's do
much
it
for
again.
all that good work.
Call me
Oh,
Sisyphus.
and then, once we incorporate all the final reps, I think, perhaps you could look at the numbering, just make the numbering consistent throughout.
The
That was
numbering
gonna be my
is
comment on style.
inconsistent? Is it?
Yes.
It is, okay, well, then it's my error completely. So you don't necessarily have a problem stylistically with the numbers, it's just make sure it's consistent.
Like on this capital plan, good. A, B, E.
I have never come to terms with the Microsoft stuff that way. For some
You
reason,
ought
it
to-
always confuses
You ought to
me.
become friends with Microsoft.
Oh,
Well,
No, I am
I'm
friends with
gonna,
Microsoft.
I'm gonna take
you
it
see.
one step further,
Yeah.
John. This is, call this one policy,
Yep.
or or is it
Oh.
four policies?
Okay, so what you've got is, say, yeah, so stabilization would be one, capital, I got it now, sure, can do that, yeah.
Stabilization is one,
Yeah.
general reserves is two, free cash is three, capital is four, borrowing is five,
Right.
right?
Next time, we can have our own game of Where's Waldo, that is, where's the inconsistent numbering? Try to do that.
Good. Okay,
At least it wasn't whack-a-mole.
that's great. It's good to
This is great.
see that work coming together. That looks really good. Okay, budget opportunities? We've got
None.
a whole
Yeah.
plate full of them, right? So I'll get a note out to Kerry and see if we can reschedule the capital planning committee, maybe swap them with that other.
Land use and administration.
Use and administration, and we'll confirm that as soon as we can. If that's not possible, then we'll try and move the capital committee to another time. Okay?
Yep.
Good.
We will be meeting weekly through March.
Yes.
Because of the renumbering, and because of a couple other things we got on my plate, can I take 2 weeks to get this back to you to reflect what we've done this evening?
That's fair.
Fine.
Yeah,
I won't say no.
sounds good.
Okay.
Okay?
I'm
Anything
just
else?
glad you're doing it.
Yeah, it's been awesome. It's been,
It's really fun. And a learning experience, and a humbling experience.
Okay, anything else for this evening? I have a-
Motion to adjourn.
Thank you.
I'll second it.
Those in favor?
Aye.
Aye?
Thank you. Good night.